let me just kick off by welcoming you all. I'm going to hand over to Amy Kean to chair this session in just a few moments. But just to let you know, we've just finished our conference there, a session on carbon tracking, and that was a great session with Schneider Electric, Symbol, and Endeavour, giving us their perspectives on how to track carbon. That session and this session has been recorded, so feel free to catch up on that one, or if you need to rewatch this one, that recording will be available next week. This session is also running in parallel with the Race for 2030 session on innovation, and so feel free, you can go to those hyperlinks that you have in your calendar and switch between the channels, but we're hoping you stay right here and enjoy this afternoon. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Amy Kean from Stride Renewables. Amy, thank you very much for being the chair for this afternoon, and I'll hand over to you now.
Well, hello, Jared. Thanks for having me. I'm trying to channel Lee Sales with that introduction. Great to be here, and we've promised we've got a very funny session with 7 great panelists to discuss making the business case for energy productivity innovations. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to First Nations people, both past, present and emerging. So we have Energetics, Northmore, Gordon, Molycop, pitt&sherry and Siemens to discuss how we can make the business case compelling, because we know that often energy efficiency doesn't stack up by itself. Unless you've got that compelling business case, you're probably wasting your time. And in this crazy COVID world, it's more important than ever that we share our tips and tricks and learn from each other. Successful leaders know that they need to develop holistic strategies that identify co-benefits, productivity gains, internal champions, clear communications, and also the use of cutting-edge technologies. So without further ado, please start putting the questions in the Q&A box. Feel free to jump to the race session at any time, and know that all recordings will be distributed. But I'd like to welcome Dr. Gordon Weiss, who I'm sure most of you know him. He's very much the decarbonisation expert from Energetics, and not many people know more about this topic than him. So over to you, Gordon, to make some opening remarks.
Thanks, Amy. So if I can share the screen. Okay. Thanks. So I'm just here to set the scene. So it's a very, very short presentation about making the business case for energy and for productivity innovations. I think it builds on a number of the themes that have been discussed at the exchange already. So I'll start with this. Now, this is a curve of a forecast of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it happens to be Australia's, but that's not really relevant, because what goes into making up the energy emissions projection is a whole lot of things that result in greenhouse gas emissions. And although it's for a nation, and so the numbers on the y-axis are kind of large compared to a business's, a lot of the things that make it up are similar to what's in a business, and it includes the targets and the projection. And, you know, a lot of the businesses that you engage with talk about net zero targets. They talk about interim targets at 2030. No, it's quite simple. Now, what we did at Energetics is go behind the numbers in this emissions projection that was published by the Australian government, and we uncovered a few interesting things. And one of the things we uncovered was that it did in fact project a significant improvement in Australia's energy productivity. And what I just did prior to this session is take out those improvements in energy productivity and see what Australia's emissions would be without improvements in energy productivity. And as you can see, it makes it quite a different story. So instead of having something where the country is within, you know, it's getting close to achieving the Paris commitment of 26 to 28% reduction, without energy productivity improvements, it's way off. And I think that's, in terms of setting the scene, the first message I'd like to get across is that energy productivity improvements is a significant component of any business's pathway to a 2030 target or pathway to net zero. Now, this next slide here, this just came out earlier this week, and I think probably there's been a lot of talk about this during the exchange. It's a group called the Investor Agenda. The Australian component of that is an NGO called the IGCC, the Institution of Investors in Climate Change. And they speak for a lot of money. And I've highlighted things here. So these are 587 investors around the world. And guess what? With 46 trillion in assets, they're not mum and dad investors. These are the global super funds, the mutual funds. A lot of them are in Australia, such as Australian Super. And as you can see there, those investors, in this case, in this statement, are calling for governments to commit to a climate change action in the upcoming Glasgow conference. But the thing is, the trick is, those investors are the same ones that own substantial portions of most public companies, because to put that 46 trillion into perspective, that is about half the value of the global equity markets. So that is a substantial amount of money, and those investors are asking companies to make similar commitments. So the reason why this, in tying it back to the question of energy productivity, is that in the past, and I think Jared has already made that comment in his opening remarks, you were scratching around for reasons why you should invest in energy productivity. Things like this change that story. Because what you're now able to say when you're looking for the reasons is go to those in the business with the company and say, you know what? An investment in energy productivity will help us meet our emissions reduction objectives, the ones that our owners are demanding we pursue. And guess what? We can probably make some money along the way. So it's a no-brainer. Okay, so they're all my comments, and I'll hand back to Amy to introduce the speakers, the rest of the speakers who can now get into some of the detail. Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. We might just hold off and have questions afterwards, because I think there'll be a lot of questions. You've set the scene. It's very clear that energy productivity is critical and investors are demanding it. Keen to hear about, I guess, solutions. And also how some of the challenges are overcome, and you certainly know what those challenges are, so we might focus on that after the panel. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Robert Nicholson, who's the energy sector leader from pitt&sherry. I'm not going to read everyone's bios today. I encourage you to have a look on the website. They're all there. I think we'd rather focus on a conversation, but importantly, Robert did play for MIT in Boston. He played cricket, and although he's not an engineer, that's the closest he's got to attending an engineering university. So, Robert, over to you. You're on mute, Robert.
My apologies. You'd think after 12 months of this, we'd figure out what's going on. Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. I'm going to present this afternoon on what makes an energy productivity business case a little bit different, and why we think it should be used when integrating energy innovation into a site. As Amy said, I'm the market lead for pitt&sherry. We're an Australian-owned engineering consultancy servicing a number of markets you see there on the screen. And we've been around for about 50 years and are represented across the East Coast with capability across the country. We probably all know the typical energy efficiency business case, and they're really important. There's nothing wrong with them at all. Energy efficiency is really fundamental to us helping towards getting us towards net zero, reducing the cost of our carbon impact on energy consumption. They're the product of most energy audits, and something that really should always be considered by any business. A summary might look something like this. You have the solution, energy savings, cost savings, maintenance perhaps, capital cost, payback, CO2 emissions reduction. But energy productivity businesses cases are a little bit different. We're going to talk a little bit about them. They're different because while they include energy efficiency, they look at more of the performance outcomes from an economic perspective. That is the value of the output or the increased output able to be produced by a unit of energy input. It's a measure of the effective use of energy as well as the efficient use of energy. So while it is being more efficient, it can also include the capture and reuse of wasted energy such as heat in a process. It can optimize the use of available energy stored thermally, such as heating or cooling streams. It enables us to better utilize renewable resources, especially when businesses operate at times other than during the day or when combined with other innovative resources measures. And it also helps us manage demand, as the productive use of energy is often the most cost-effective use of energy as well. So it's about improving how we use energy, endeavouring to extract more value from it. It's aiming to do a little bit more with less. We're going to talk about a case example today that we're currently working on with the DPI, Dairy New South Wales, and A2EP. And we've worked across a number of broad range of industry sectors, large clients, small clients, but I specifically chosen a dairy farm today to use as this example because agriculture is a critically important part of the energy productivity conversation, and it really has an opportunity to make that industry, it's quite transformational. If you consider there's about 5,800 dairy farms across the country, all ranging sizes, this one's around about average, it can really make a terrific difference. So it's rather than one single site, it's a range of them. So we're doing a few things at this dairy farm. We're introducing and retrofitting some thermal storage into the working dairy farm, integrating solar PV, which is not the most obvious fit in a dairy farm. We'll look at that in a moment. And coupled with that, we've introduced cold storage by way of chilled water. We could use glycol, at which we'll charge using the solar PV, and we'll use waste heat from the refrigeration plant and use that to warm up water that will be further boosted to temperature using the solar. And where possible, we'll reuse existing equipment, replace and add equipment where necessary, and this also can result in additional efficiencies. So our goal here is to increase energy productivity and better utilize their energy resources. So how do we add energy productivity? Well, in a dairy, typically 2/3 of the energy consumption is consumed by the refrigeration and hot water plants, sometimes more, and rarely much less. So we've said we'd add solar PV, but early morning and late afternoon milking is generally not conducive to solar PV. And so we'll need to look to better align the energy source, and partly because solar PV is a less expensive form of energy, so it makes sense. And for that reason, it makes better economic sense, because energy productivity is fundamentally an economic measure. You see here the typical dairy has sort of 3 peak loads: early morning milking, mid to late afternoon milking, and an overnight load. And this one perhaps is a little bit early, but it's why solar on dairy farms without some form of energy storage or the ability to utilize it elsewhere is rarely a good idea. Matching solar generation with the site profile is paramount. And we come across sites all the time where this due diligence is not done and farms are left with an exporting system rather than a cheaper energy resource that can be used more effectively on site. And the other thing to note too is bigger is not always better. You know, farms have big sheds, but they don't necessarily need big solar systems. So this project helps to solve that problem and looks to better utilize that renewable energy on dairy farms, making it more productive. This diagram shows a typical and basic process flow for a dairy. milk out of the animal at about 37 degrees, usually pre-cooled by passing through a freshwater connected heat exchange, often bore water, to reduce it to around 17 degrees, sometimes a little bit more. Then entering the vat where it'll be further cooled to less than 5 degrees to meet food standard guidelines, and the process should happen in about 3.5 hours. Hot water is required for both general washdown and vat washing, and these are typically heated overnight during off-peak. Separate tanks as both require different temperatures. And the process is normally done twice a day, milking twice a day, sometimes once, even 3, though that's much less common. So it's this daily cooling process, which is typically long during peak times, and the heating process, which is overnight, so it makes up the bulk of a non-irrigated dairy farm's energy consumption. The farm we're going to talk about today is representative of a small herd-sized dairy. So through this project that we're doing with DPI and Dairy New South Wales, we're also following the same project implementation with much larger farm herds and milk volumes. It really is quite replicable. And I'm using this farm because we've actually installed this system at this farm, and we've got some early feedback and results coming from it. So their annual production is around just over 1 million litres, consumption just over 40 megawatt hours, and the cost of 14.3 around there. Refrigeration load here is 27% of the total. This case, the refrigeration system is old, it's at capacity, and ultimately needs to be replaced. The heating makes up over 45% of the load. And the energy performance indicator here, which is really a great energy productivity measure, is 0.04 kilowatt hours per litre. In the dairy industry, literature suggests that it should be about 0.047. So you might say, well, this farm's operating pretty well, so why change? But as we said, we've got systems here at capacity, a larger herd size of milk output, and it's already underperforming to, in reality. Those things aren't really an option with the current refrigeration plant setup. So looking to change those things, can allow us to bring innovation in, and that'll reduce that energy performance indicator and provide a more productive use of that energy being supplied. The system that we're looking to implement across a number of farms, it changes what the farm operation generally does, and it looks at the use of renewables and a more productive use of that energy to improve the operations of the dairy. So you'll see here that we've introduced solar, and the energy it generates is being used to pre-chill glycol and water, or in some cases it'll just be to pre-chill water, using that refrigeration system. This will bring an additional cooling stage to the milk prior to the milk entering the vat. So as before, we had it coming from the animal at 37 degrees, freshwater heat exchange to 17 or 20, and then to the vat. The milk now passes through an additional pre-cooling stage, bringing it down to about 8 degrees prior to entering the vat, meaning that the vat now only needs to cool for a further 3 or so degrees to get to below 5 and maintain that temperature until pickup. And this new process saves a significant amount of cooling time, utilises a renewable energy resource to do so, and so it's much better for the farmer. The heat is also being recovered from the refrigeration plant and used to produce warm water, which can then be boosted by excess solar or again heated overnight as normal, but it's doing so in much more efficiently as it's starting at a much higher temperature with that reused heat. Now, this is a general proposed concept. Not all farms will have this exact setup, but the concept overall remains the same. So we'll just have a look at some of the results for this particular farm itself. So we looked at some new equipment. The farm, as I mentioned earlier, had a fairly rundown chiller. It was about 30 to 40 years old. It's a bit like watching an old TV screen, I guess, and now we have a new one. So we've introduced a new chiller, much more efficient, and it'll also be able to service a larger milk volume, which is going to be important going forward. A couple of new heat exchangers, a new vat, 10 kilowatts of solar PV, so again, not a big system. Doesn't need to be a big system, and that'll produce about 14 megawatt hours of cheaper renewable energy every year. A heat recovery tank, and then some ancillary costs, so a project cost of about $90,000. And while the project has been recently installed, and we're doing some M&V with A2EP as part of this program, what we've got here is the estimated savings, and we are seeing some really early indications that these are very good of what we expect to be realised. The new chiller has a much higher COP. It'll draw less energy from the grid to do the same amount of work, and it needs to work a lot less as well in the final milk cooling process because of the use of that pre-chilled water storage. We're saving about 25% from the new chiller to the old chiller, and that's an efficiency measure. Hot water saving from heat recovery reduces grid consumption, and that's a 21% saving of the hot water consumption, the hot water use. That's purely a productivity measure because we're capturing heat from energy that's already been expended into the refrigeration system. The solar PV replaces grid energy for both the chilled water tank and the hot water boost. And then it also enables us to provide other grid avoidance for on-farm energy, things like food mills, grain mills, etc. And we're expecting to use about 72% initially of the renewable energy that's generated with its current demands, but that also allows us to apply other demands as need be. The consumption is reduced overall by 16%, so that's an overall energy consumption from the start. The grid consumption is reduced by 42%, so we're really having a fairly significant emissions impact, 15 tonnes, and again that 42% emissions because we're using renewables. But significantly, the costs are reduced by 40%. And then the performance indicator now for the same volume of milk is 17.5% better than previously. That's a fairly significant step. And it's coming out of efficiency that we've introduced and the productivity measures like heat recovery and pre-cooling that we're using that energy more effectively for. So while we're providing the same volume of milk to the market, it's providing a much greater economic output for each unit of energy input that's going into the system. The business case we see at the moment, and this has still got some bits to go actually, significant energy savings from a more energy productive system, but we've also got fairly significant other savings due to the modernisation of the system and other things that are being allowed to happen. So the direct feedback from the farmer is the chiller maintenance. That was what it was costing him to maintain his old chiller. He's got a new VAT system now that's a push button cleaning system, which saves him labour, about half an hour a day. Doesn't sound like a lot, but even at $25 an hour, it's still, if we wanted to pay someone that amount of money, it's time that the farmer has doing other things. And really significantly, what's not listed here, and something that we will also be quantifying with the farmer, is the reduction in penalties for higher temperature milk. And this was an issue previously, but this system now ensures that the milk will reach the required temperature well within that 3.5 hour time frame. And in fact, we've had feedback from the farmer already that the VAT refrigeration system pretty much turns off when the milking is finished, rather than it going on for a number of hours afterwards as it did previously. So this is some feedback we've had from the farmer. It's a much quieter system, it's much easier to use. The VAT is obviously easier to clean, and that saves labour hours. He's very confident and pleased with the quality of the milk and resolving an issue for him. Servicing costs are reduced with newer equipment. He's producing hot water from the process and saving costs that way. And really what's important as well is that this new setup will cater for higher volumes of milk without having to change or significantly increase any energy consumption. So the system as it is now can cater for a larger volume. So he can increase his herd, or he can now you know, bring his herd back to the productivity that he needs to do. So it's an option that the farmer can take up and further improve his energy performance. So that's a bit of an overview of the business case. Energy productivity really is more than efficiency, but it certainly includes energy efficiency. It looks to optimise energy use both in existing grid and any renewable resources. Ultimately, we want to make the most out of both of those and most out of renewables as much as we can. It reduces the energy input for the unit of output, and this is where energy productivity is so important. It increases the financial return for each unit of energy input. That is the measure. It improves the productive use of renewable energy to match with demands, and the benefits are operational as well as just the energy costs themselves. It's not just purely, you know, a fixed cost dollar for energy. Energy now becomes a variable input. And for the dairy industry, this can really be transformational. We've looked at probably 80 or so dairies in the last couple of years across a number of different regions in New South Wales and Victoria. And, you know, this is a really good opportunity, an initiative from DPI and Dairy New South Wales and A2EP to really make a difference. And we're certainly looking forward to reviewing the final results of this farm, but also the other farms that are part of this program. So that's me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Robert. That's a great news story for the non-financial co-benefits of energy productivity as well. So I guess you work with a number of clients as well. Are you starting to see those trends with other businesses? The fact that energy is so variable and the outputs can be, you know, how you can achieve energy productivity, which you summed up very nicely, is just increasing the financial returns per unit of energy.
Yeah, certainly. I think mostly, you know, people are realising that energy is not just a fixed cost, but it actually is an input to their business. And when you start to investigate how energy is being used on a site, and this is across large manufacturing sites or, you know, any site really, you start to see, well, if I do this, it actually changes how I do this. And water and energy, there's a really great nexus between those two resources. And, you know, to be able to extract heat out of water that you've used in order to recharge something, or to, you know, there's a tremendous opportunity for businesses to save on waste water. Quite often businesses are paying more to flush hot water down the drain than they are to buy water in the first place. And if they can take the heat out of it, then they can reuse that heat and reduce costs. So there's a whole host of opportunity. Labour and time is another thing that comes into play across businesses. And, you know, it really is something that we can make such a huge difference in this space. And I think finance people within businesses are also looking at saying, well, actually energy now is part of my raw materials. You know, I can put in so many kilowatt hours and I can get something back. And we monitor everything else. You know, you sort of negotiate and make sure you don't waste your other raw materials. Well, then we need to do the same thing with energy. It's terrific. There's so much opportunity.
That's great. Just to the audience, we've got a great audience. It's a bit tricky, but do you mind putting the questions into the Q&A box, not to the chat box? So we've got a bunch of questions in the chat box, but I might ask you to transfer them. I'm going to ask Robert a couple of questions, but because we've got so many people speaking, I'm also, during the next presentation, going to ask Robert to type some of the technical answers directly into the Q&A box. But we'll keep the conversation going a little bit. Just how did this dairy compare to the industry average? Was it a small size or a big size?
So this one's slightly smaller than the industry average. It has a couple of hundred head. The industry average has just gone up in probably the last, say, 10 years, I think, to about 230 odd. But you've got them ranging from, so in this program, we've got other dairies with 600 and then in between. So it's one of those things that's very scalable. And while it's small, as I said, there's, you know, almost 6,000 dairies across Australia, many of which are in New South Wales and Victoria, southern Queensland, that aren't too dissimilar to this size.
Yeah. So the outcomes are very positive. How did you pitch it to the client to start with?
So the team here, through this program with New South Wales Dairy, they were very instrumental in sort of talking to farmers about these opportunities. There have been some similar programs done like this in the past with using ice banks, etc. But ultimately, it's sitting down talking to the farmer. One of the things that we've come across a lot is that, and why I mentioned the whole solar and dairies, and not just dairies, but many farms, you know, it's quite often farmers will get caught up in saying, oh, yeah, solar is great, but really it doesn't fit their business. And so they're making expectations that they want to use, and they want to be renewable. You know, they've got grid constraints quite often, or security supply issues with energy. Renewable is a great thing for our agricultural sector. But actually how to use it more effectively is really the key. So, you know, kudos to DPI and New South Wales and A2EP for sort of putting these things together so that you can actually go to an industry and say, here are some of the things that you can do.
Yeah. So I'll let you type some questions, and then during the larger Q&A, we might talk about how much of the energy productivity is a manufacturing production problem, and then how we pitch it, because I think we've all got a lot to learn from that angle. So keep the questions going, and Robert's agreed to answer them all, and then everyone can read the direct responses. But thank you for those many technical questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Very inspiring and great to see a flowchart with the data and the analysis, and clearly a compelling business case as well with the co-benefits. They're great to hear. So we've now got a presentation from Northmore, Gordon and Molycop. We've got 3 speakers, so I'm looking forward to them dancing around this presentation. And in light of sharing some fun facts and not reading the bios late in the afternoon, I'd like to introduce Andrew Clarke, who's a principal consultant at Northmore Gordon, and has been told he's too creative to be an engineer. And in his spare time, he actually teaches glass art in a private studio, which I'd love to see some pictures of that as the next challenge, Andrew. And we have Jeffrey Neave, who's the Environment Manager from Molycop Gordon, Molycop Australia as well, I apologise. And Jeffrey confesses to wearing Ugg boots right now, and I will concede that I am also wearing Ugg boots, and I'm sure we can have a show of hands for those that are not. It's a occupational hazard these days, so thanks for sharing that fun fact. And the third speaker as part of this presentation is Daniel Hodges, who's the Engineering Manager at Molycop. And Daniel's been learning to play the electric guitar via Zoom since COVID hit, so we might even get a performance, you never know. So over to Northmore Gordon and Molycop to give their joint presentation, and keep the questions coming in the Q&A box, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, I hope you can see the presentation screen. This presentation is about making the business case for energy productivity. So we took a slightly different tack in terms of our presentation. We're talking a little bit more about how to convince management to invest. What we'll go through today is Jeff will give a short introduction to Molycop, the business. Then I'll give a bit of an introduction to who Northmore Gordon are, and then what has driven continued improvement at Molycop. We've got a couple of examples. I'll kick off with one project example, which Daniel will follow up with a short session on innovation within a business context. Hopefully we'll have time for a second example, and then a little Q&A. So I'll keep moving. Passing over to Jeff Neave from Molycop to have a few minutes about Molycop at Waratah. which is their main site.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. So I work for Molycop Waratah. Molycop is a global organisation, but today we're going to focus the discussion around the Waratah branch, which is in Newcastle, New South Wales. So we make 230,000 tonnes per annum, approximately, of steel from totally from scrap metal sources. So it's basically a recycling operation. You might have to click the next slide for me, Andrew. Yeah, thank you. And we've got two main products that we sell. The first one is grinding media, which are the steel balls you see in the photograph on the screen. So to get to a steel ball, the process is liquid metal is formed in the arc furnace. It is sent to a billet caster where a rectangular billet is cast. That billet is then taken to a bar mill, which is then rolled out to round bar. And then finally, that round bar is then sent to a ball mill and steel balls are created. Now, at each step in that process, electrical and natural gas energy is consumed because the material is cooled down between each process. The next product is railway wheels. You probably know what they are. They go on the bottom of those big long things that people used to travel on before COVID. So to get to a railway wheel, we again start with liquid steel from the furnace. We cast that into ingots, which are then transferred to a wheel forge and then forged into a railway wheel, which you can see a photograph there of a red hot one. So to create those products, we use about a bit over 1 million gigajoules of natural gas per year. And to put that into perspective, it's around the same use as 25,000 average homes. And we use 180,000 megawatt hours per year of electricity, which is equivalent to about 36,000, average homes. Of that 180,000, we signed up to a Renewables PPA 2 years ago. So 100,000 megawatt hours of that 180 comes from a combination of wind and solar sources. So I've been talking about decarbonisation and the path to net zero, and for electricity, it's a pretty clear-cut path in that you can purchase renewable electricity quite easily. But when it comes to natural gas, the task is a little bit harder. So it is possible to convert or replace natural gas furnaces with electric furnaces and do the heating electrically, and then source that electricity from renewable sources. But one of the problems there is that the capital cost is quite large when you're replacing a furnace. And at the moment, there's basically no return on investment. Now, that sounds like a pretty awful story, but to put that into perspective, 3 or 4 years ago, we would have been sitting here saying that the running costs of an electric furnace would be about double that of a gas furnace. So now we're sort of thinking, you know, they're quite similar. So I would think in another few years, those tables will turn. So because of that, in the medium term, we really need to focus on increasing gas efficiency with the appliances that we currently have. And that work is not wasted, because even in the future, if we convert to alternate fuels, for example, then if you've got a lower gas consumption, then conversion to another fuel is only made that much easier by virtue of the fact that you're consuming less to start with. So I think that paints a bit of a picture about where Molycop is at, particularly with the carbon reduction from natural gas burning. And I just want to pass back now to Andrew Clarke to talk through a couple of test cases. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so now a little bit about Northmore Gordon. So we're an energy and carbon consultancy. We focus mostly on the larger end of the industrial and commercial industries. We cover energy productivity, carbon reduction strategies, and we're also significant in the offset and renewable energy certificate creation sectors. So in ESCIs in New South Wales, VEECs in Victoria, ACCUs and RECs. We've been working with Molycop and providing good value since about 2008. So we've got a long relationship with these guys. To date, our estimate is that we've reduced CO2 emissions by about 15,000 tonnes per annum. The relationship between Northmore Gordon and Molycop is a pretty solid one. We're essentially their energy and carbon champion and advisor. I do most of the work with Molycop and work pretty closely with a range of people in the business. We helped them develop their energy management system for the energy efficiency opportunities legislation. When it came out, the energy management system was combined into the ISO 14001 environmental management system, and that work continued after the EEO program was abandoned. We help with opportunity identification and development, but we also keep up to date with funding programs and so that we can jump on opportunities. And what Molycop finds useful in terms of having us on board is that they're a resource-constrained business, and having us on a kind of flexible arrangement means that they only need to pay us when there's something that we need to do. They haven't got a full-time person looking at all of this stuff, and we have quite a broad range of skills and knowledge that we can bring at a moderate cost compared to them having that skill in-house. So I guess what you call us is a trusted specialist consultant, and that can apply to any business that's not big enough to have their own internal expert, I guess, in this area. And it's important to have someone who knows the company and the processes and can step in and help. So I'll go through an example of a current project to kind of examine how we go about developing a business case and making it acceptable for investment by the business in an area where, in an industry where generally they're looking for 12 months, maybe 2 year simple payback. So they're looking for a pretty good business case. So an idea we had some years ago was to install variable speed drives on combustion air fans for a steel reheat furnace. Now they're currently damper controlled. So you'd think it'd be a no-brainer to install a VSD and control the flow of air with a variable speed drive. Problem is that the business case is marginal. And there's also pushback due to a perceived risk in making that change. So making the change means an altered burner airflow control mechanism. So currently they have 3 zones, and 2 of those zones are on one fan. So there's 2 separate dampers controlling the flow to each zone. We're proposing to install a combination of variable speed drive flow control and a damper on one zone that will work in parallel. And furnace manufacturers and combustion engineers tend to be conservative. They don't like changing the way they do things because it's obviously a reasonably precise kind of area to work in. So to allay the concerns of the combustion engineer on site and the people in the department who would have to sign off on the change, what I did was I got the senior electrical engineer involved in the discussion and about how that control could be done and whether it was, fairly normal approach to control and what was the company's capability of managing that. And he said, yep, not a problem. And that went a big way to giving some comfort to the people that would need to sign off on it. But again, the business case was pretty marginal. So when we had that project scoped up, and then when there was a federal grant available a year or so ago to make the business case more attractive, we already had the project scoped up, and that enabled us to meet the application deadline. And with these funding projects that come up from state and federal governments, often the time frame that they give to make an application is fairly short. So it's important to have some projects scoped up that you can jump on when those applications or when those grants are announced. The other thing we did was we identified that there was a need for a replacement of an old, worn-out, inefficient fan. So one of the fans, the two fans that we were looking at, there was some concern about its maintainability, about how much longer it was going to last. So what we did was we included the replacement of that fan in the business case because the VSD project alone didn't take up all of the funding available. So by including this fan replacement, we could actually maximise the grant amount. So get more funding for the business overall. And the other thing was, because it was the fan replacement was something they were going to have to do before too long anyway, we were able to present the return on investment from the variable speed drive part of the project, or the energy savings overall, and the funding, as directly on the variable speed drive part of the project. So it makes the variable speed drive project, the marginal cost of that project look much better. And in the end, we were successful because in getting the project signed off, because it was presented as a financial no-brainer. And in a lot of manufacturing industries, that is a really important point, because projects are generally not going to get signed off unless they're a financial no-brainer. That's what the companies are aiming for, is good financial results. So I'll hand over now to Daniel, who will cover a bit more generally within the business how we've been approaching that process of convincing the senior management to invest in these kind of projects.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And that's what I'm going to try and do today, is present a couple of ideas that we've found successful in attracting investment for these projects. And I think the point's been made a couple of times that when you look at a portfolio of project opportunities, the energy innovation projects aren't always rising to the top purely on a financial analysis. And so really underpinning these ideas, I think, is the need to tell a good story, and to make sure that you articulate the benefit beyond just the commercial. And so I think the first element that I present is around understanding where energy efficiency lies in your business's image, its goals, its culture. So how does it fit in your story? And so if you're trying to advocate that we preference an energy innovation project over another peer that may have a slightly better financial case, you need some other compelling reason. And I think in order to build that, in order to be able to tell a good story, you've got to understand why that matters to your particular business. The next idea I'd suggest is try and understand where the investment attention already lies. So focus on the opportunities that align within your broader business strategic goals. If we're looking at a significant expansion in a particular area of the business, that's where the interest is going to lie. And if you come in going, oh, let's look at this energy innovation project in this other area, it's harder to draw that attention away from where it already lies. So I'd make sure you have a good understanding of the existing investment strategy and try and dig into opportunities that are well aligned with that already. And I think the third idea that we'll present is that the big stay in business projects, pay really close attention to those, because they hurt. You know, in our experience, attracting investment towards stay in business projects, you've got to fight really hard to make that argument, because they're not as sexy, they're not going to result in more profit, a better business, a better image. But often within those large stay in business projects, incremental return on investment opportunities exist. Instead of just replacing like for like, you have an opportunity to replace with a VSD, as Andrew's demonstrated there. And if it's a $100,000 project and you want to spend an extra $10,000 on a VSD that's going to return you $10,000 of profit a year, selling that as a 100% return on investment incrementally is a much more powerful story than selling it as, can we spend another 10 grand, it'll give us a 9% return. It's exactly the same outcome, but the story's different. And so the level of attention and how attractive that proposition is changes quite a bit. And I think even in smaller non-efficiency focused projects, these incremental efficiency opportunities frequently exist. And you can't be there and advocate for each of these. So the story that you've sort of drawn out of the business, you got to tell that story to those people that are the creative people coming up with the new ideas across the business, your project managers, your maintenance managers, all those other people that are already advocating for capital. You want to make sure they understand that this energy innovation section allows them to paint a better picture for stay in business projects and earn some more money. So what I'm going to run through now is a bit of a theoretical example taken from our plant, obviously with some numbers that are more generalized because of the commercially sensitive nature, but just to try and demonstrate these ideas in action. So our arc furnace, Jeff mentioned before, we're a very energy intensive business. That gives us a bit of an advantage because there's already a lot of attention on any energy innovation and energy efficiency, because if we drop the ball there, we lose a lot of money. So we start in a better place because that conversation's already happening quite routinely with our management. But in our arc furnace, we have a fume off take that contains 5 meg of waste heat, 5 megawatts of waste heat. And when we look at opportunities across the plant, that one always pokes its head up, and we think it'd be great to be able to use that energy for something. At the moment, we pay more money to cool it down before we take it through a baghouse. We've also got a vision of greener steel. We want to do better because as a business, we think it's the right thing to do, and we also think it will give us a competitive edge in our market. So there's an undercurrent of wanting to do something in this space. So we look around, and there are technologies in steel making now where we could preheat the scrap that we introduce to our arc furnace and take advantage of that big waste heat that's going out our offtake now. But when you look at it, it's a significant capital investment. It's a transformation in the way that scrap distribution into the furnace works. Let's call it a $25 million investment. You might look at that and go, we'll never afford it. We'll never make the case. But hang on, if over the next 5 years, we've already got existing significant stay in business capital required in that area of the furnace, and if we think that such a significant energy efficiency project might attract funding to help offset the capital outlay, then maybe that story isn't one of we'll never afford it. Maybe scrap preheating for us is a potential alternative to a major stay in business investment that's coming up regardless of what we do. Yeah, it might be more upfront investment, but the incremental return might be as attractive as 50%. This could be a 2 or 3 year payback project if you consider the incremental increase in investment. We think we can attract support to offset that outlay, and it's really well aligned within our strategy. We already have an organizational focus on renewing that asset, and we already have an organizational focus on greener steel. So I think in trying to attract attention to these projects, it's becoming easier and easier because we're getting great input from guys like Andrew helping us to paint this story for our managers. But if you present energy innovation just in amongst a list of other projects and try and let them live purely on their return on investment, it's not as compelling a case as if we're able to tell a good story. So thank you. And I think if we've got time, Andrew, you're going to go on to go through another example of a win at Molycop.
Yep, thanks, Daniel. So yeah, just another example of a recent project which has actually been completed. On that reheat furnace that I was talking about before, this is the area where the bars are fed into the furnace, and there's just an open space there, and it has what's called an air curtain. So there's a fan blows air through the pipe that you can see there, and it comes out through the bottom of the structure here and blows air down. And what that does is it theoretically limits the amount of interaction between the air inside and outside, and you know, sort of acts like a bit of a door. And that's a typical alternative to moving doors on furnace openings historically. I did the numbers some years ago to look at putting actuated doors on this furnace, but it was just too expensive to even think about. A few years later, when I was looking around at various products, I found a stainless steel mesh that can be used as an alternative. I wasn't aware of it, well, I'm still not aware of it being used before in Australia. And this was the only grainy photo I could find of it in use in the US. Naturally, there was some skepticism from staff initially, basically saying, no, it won't last. It'll get caught under the bars as they feed through, and that kind of thing. So the other issues, the good thing was the estimated payback was relatively short, so that there's a reduction in radiant heat. There's potentially an improvement in convective heat transfer, although that's very difficult to have confidence in any estimation there for the convective part anyway. And also, of course, if you can avoid having an air curtain, you save a significant amount of electricity running the fan. But there was reluctance from the department because it's an unknown application of the material. They weren't familiar with the idea of special stainless steel curtains that are flexible, and yeah, so definitely some reluctance and skepticism. So I put a little bit of time into looking for some information that could provide some confidence. And what I did find, particularly from the supplier, was that the example of a few sites that were using it, you know, sites that are known within the steel industry, so that provided a little bit of confidence. I kept the discussion going at regular meetings that we have for months to just keep it in people's minds, and then eventually, through working through it and trying to look at it in different ways, one of the issues was that the estimated savings were smaller than what we would normally consider for creating energy saving certificates from. But because we have such a good relationship with Molycop and we're so closely involved with estimating the savings, and what I was able to do was have enough confidence to put a risk sharing certificate creation proposal together, and it made a pretty reasonable business case, financial business case, just too good to refuse. So by combining all of those things, we were able to get the project over the line. So this is a photo of the curtains when they were first installed, prior to the furnace being restarted. Something we learnt, because we had to design the curtains from drawings, we just, you know, designed them as what we thought was best. What we found was that they were slightly too long, so they've had a little bit of an issue with the walking beam mechanism lifting them and damaging them a little bit, so we've ordered some shorter spares for the next shutdown. So, but the important thing is that the result between the charge opening and the discharge opening, which I haven't shown, we've done thorough measurement verification, and they're in the process of creating certificates for 5,000 gigajoules per annum of natural gas saving and 130 megawatt hours per annum of electricity, and 370 tonnes per annum of CO2 emission savings. So simple project, which there was reluctance, but we still managed to get the project over the line by taking advantage of opportunities that were there to make the business case as good a business case as we possibly could. So in summing up, I guess the key things that we've learnt between Northmore, Gordon and Molycop over the years is that It's important to have a range of projects scoped up and ready for an opportunity. You need to keep abreast of what your business as usual or stay in business capital opportunities are so that you can take advantage of those. Keep abreast of what funding is upcoming through federal or state governments. Something that we haven't mentioned so far is using R&D tax rebates to help finance any testing and trials. And in terms of getting it over the line, countering hesitance with support from trusted experts is an important point. That can be an internal or external expert. People's reluctance can be softened if you provide some opinion from someone that they trust, and that's really important. Wherever you can, include offset certificate revenue, and again, that's an advantage where we're both the advisor and certificate provider, so we can very easily build that into business cases with Molycop. And another thing to think about too is you can combine a number of small projects into one project so that the revenue from the certificates can then offset can more than offset the administrative cost of creating the certificates. And finally, try to frame it in a way that best demonstrates the ROI. As Daniel was saying, that there's a number of ways you can look at the project, and you want to present the best picture you can to the management people who have to sign off on it. So thanks for your time, and I thought I'd throw it out there for questions if we've got time. But Amy, if we're a bit pushed for time, then happy to move on and listen to the next presentation.
Thanks, Andrew, Jeffrey and Daniel. Yeah, that was great. Keen to have a discussion at the end about the communications, because I'm such a fan of that. Like, you can have the best business case in the world, but unless you communicate it and bundle it up and present it in a compelling way, you don't get anywhere. And I think often we focus just on the numbers. So we might talk about what everyone's tips are at the end. There's no questions in the Q&A session, so we're going to move on quickly now, so we have time for everyone at the end. I'd now like to welcome Siemens to talk to us. So we have Umer and Josh. Umer Mohammed is the Head of Energy Performance and Sustainability, and Josh McIntyre is Energy Performance and Sustainability Business Development Manager. So over to you before we invite the panel for final questions.
Thank you very much for that, Amy, and thanks to A2EP for giving us an opportunity to present today. As Amy mentioned, my name is Umer Mohammed. I head the Energy Performance Services Business Unit. We are a global business unit and a part of the larger Siemens group. We leverage the technology leadership that Siemens has always been known for, and we bring together those solutions into energy performance contracting. So our core deliverable to the market is energy efficiency, which is gaining a lot of traction. Sustainability is our, let's say, we hold it very close to our heart. And by delivering projects around energy performance contracting, we also guarantee those outcomes. And what many people don't know about Siemens is Siemens also has its own bank, and we do provide financing for the projects that we deliver, such that most of the projects are, if not most, but some of the projects can have a positive cash flow situation right from day one. So imagine the situation: you're saving energy, you're able to wrap that up in a nice financing solution, such that you're not incurring any capex or OPEX costs. You're entirely funding that through your energy savings. So that's the end deliverable we like to achieve for our clients. We have been associated with, in Victoria particularly, with what was called back in 2009 the Green Garment Buildings Program. And we helped deliver many iconic projects such as the Federation Square, Museums Victoria, and one of those projects, RMIT, we take great pleasure in presenting to you today. We are joined by Michael Snow from RMIT, who will be available for question and answers. We will present a video and a slide pack, which my colleague Josh will present. So with that, I'll pass on to my colleague Josh McIntyre.
Yeah, thank you, Umer. I'm just going to share the video up now, and we'll start that and just have a quick run through on an overview of the RMIT project.
RMIT is a global university of design, technology and enterprise. We run 3 campuses here in Australia, as well as 2 smaller sites, 2 campuses in Vietnam and an industry engagement centre in Spain. Sustainability is core to what we do here at the university. We are beginning to build this into all aspects of our learning, teaching and operations.
Siemens were engaged by RMIT to look at ways to reduce the carbon footprint, reduce utility consumptions on site, so that's electricity, natural gas and water, through optimizing the current infrastructure, creating the campus of the future.
The Sustainable Urban Precincts program, also called the SUP at RMIT, is a significant investment that RMIT have made in the sustainability of our campus and also the asset management practices in terms of infrastructure upgrades to really bring our campus into an industry-leading position. In total, the program, which covers our 3 main Melbourne campuses, included an investment of about $128 million. And the Siemens delivery, which occurred on the city campus, took up a significant portion of that.
What Siemens looked at doing was putting a decentralized energy system on site. The major success was the installation of solutions such as the generation plant you see over there. In the last 12 months, that used to be a empty roof space. All the infrastructure you can see has been put up and installed as part of the project, and this was done in a living, breathing campus. That encompassed working with the university as well as City Power, who's the electricity distributor through the city.
We've incorporated all of the city connection points to one main connection point with the grid through a new high voltage ring main infrastructure upgrade, which has then enabled all of our generation assets on the campus to feed back into that network and supply all buildings, as opposed to being deployed on unique buildings individually.
We put in a Siemens Desigo BMS system to control the entire campus, acting as the backbone and the brains behind all the optimization. We also looked at redevelopment of their chilled water systems, their heating hot water systems with regards to their boilers, redesigning RMIT's lighting infrastructure, looking at LED solutions throughout the campus.
We've actually got a cogeneration system which generates electricity but also heat. Electricity that's generated has a waste heat stream that under normal process is exhausted to atmosphere. Under our process, we capture that waste heat, we turn that into hot water. That hot water then heats our entire campus through our reticulation networks that have been installed and distributed across all of the buildings.
Here on the city campus, Siemens have guaranteed a number of savings through the SUP program. This is up to 16,500 tonnes of emissions, up to 18 million kilowatt hours worth of electrical savings, and 37 million litres of water. A program like SUP has really helped improve the university systems and processes, allowing us to make better informed decisions when it comes to asset management and our plans going forward.
RMIT and Siemens under this partnership are pioneers, and it's been a challenging partnership at times because we are really leading in the space. But at the end of the day, we've delivered a real tangible outcome that can be built upon across the industry and built upon by RMIT as we move forward in our energy efforts.
So yeah, I'll just click over to a presentation now. So yeah, just to maybe tackle some of the key elements of what was covered in the video. If we start to look at the RMIT, for those that you might not be familiar with the RMIT City Campus, it's a very unique arrangement. It's a whole conglomerate of individual buildings throughout the city complex, and as it says there, it's almost 6% of the CBD is made up of RMIT. It's obviously one of Australia's original tertiary institutions, and they enjoy international reputation in excellence in education, research, and engagement with industry and community. So through the Sustainable Urban Precincts program, as said, it was quite an extreme investment made. Sorry, I've just...
Josh, just letting you know the screen wasn't coming up. I've thrown the slide wasn't coming up. I've thrown one up for you though.
Thank you. Sorry. Yep. Sorry, I just need to fix that up. 2 seconds now. That's just jumped in front of my notes. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, the program.
Josh, sorry, mate. If you want to have another go, just sharing that one, just go for it. It wasn't coming up.
No, it's okay. I'm set up now. Sorry.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, let's go for another share there. That should bring that up.
Okay. How's that?
Not yet.
Nope.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Try again. Apologies, we did practice this earlier. Okay,
yeah, we can see that now.
Thank you. All right. Sorry. So yeah, basically, as I was just sort of going through there, it's going a little bit crazy. Sorry, I'm just going to restart the present. Sorry, Jared, I might get you to share that again. I've got no control on the screen now, so.
Not a problem, Josh. Let me get that up for you. That's this one, and then. All right. Just let me know when to move things on. Back in
yeah, thank you. So basically, through that precincts program, yeah, RMIT really recognised the opportunity to tackle emissions-based objectives, but also delivering some of those complementary outcomes, as Michael said in the video. So things like the improved maintenance and asset management throughout the campus, yeah, obviously reduced resource consumption. I think very importantly, leveraging the learning and teaching applications and opportunities for research, but ultimately providing that future-proof infrastructure for the campus. If we jump to the next screen, Jared. So some of those key numbers, that we really wanted to update on as well, because this project was completed in 2018. So we've really been in operation now for 3 years. As you can see, we've got some fantastic numbers of how this project was put together. The initial numbers underlying are the original guarantee elements, but we've just really seen in this last consolidation of the data, we've basically achieved a 50% reduction in grid electricity usage on the campus, and that increase of tons of CO2 saved is now up just that little bit higher as well, to 17,000 tons. So a fantastic result for this particular project. And I guess from the outset that RMIT was had some fantastic strategic goals for this project, and I think it's the coordination of the research and teaching approach, the emissions approach, and also the infrastructure approach, I think really sets the scene for what makes a great project. So looking for those common drivers to move a project forward is the ultimate part of the discussion we're having here today. So if we can jump to the next slide, Jared. So as you sort of saw, some of the key elements, there's really 5 key elements of this project that was broken up. So there was obviously the HV infrastructure required to connect up a large proportion of the buildings in the city precinct, and then provide that cogen plant to deliver that, and obviously all the cloud-based monitoring and controls elements that went into that. Then there was also, once we've got that up and running, we've taken that waste heat and introduced that into the boiler system, and taken the opportunity to deliver a district cooling and hot water ring mains to those same buildings being supplied by the HV ring main. And then obviously there was a huge host of components throughout each of the individual buildings that were looked at from an optimization perspective, making controls upgrades and changes, repurposing, a lot similar to some of my colleagues who have been before us have been talking about in those smaller individual applications. And then lastly is the lighting upgrades. So over 12,000 lights replaced across the precinct. So just a very large component of the project. And lastly is the water management side of things. So bringing in those water harvesting, high efficiency fittings, all these components. So I think one of the key things for a takeaway out of this project is the combination of multiple improvement measures that can really stack up and make your project achievable and really hit those key financial ROI paybacks. Sorry, next slide, please, Jared. And then lastly, I think just to sum this up a little bit, I guess trying to identify, to make the business case relevant and winnable and achievable with inside your businesses is to understand those pressing issues and assign and lock the solutions that are developed to those overcoming those challenges. So in this process, we use the energy performance contracting model, which is a multi-staged approach to a energy solution, and accessing and supported by government funding and other funding sources. We obviously can combine that total project approach, and through that financial guarantee, it really hits home and helps the customers meet their financial requirements. So a guarantee of a 7 or 10 year project like this one was, it really means a lot more when it's backed by a financial guarantee. So those numbers are locked in; they don't change, and any improvements above what was promised is benefit borne by the customer. So I think that's probably wrapping it up, Jared. That's the last slide, is probably opening up for questions. I think, Amy, we're probably looking at a larger group questionnaire. Is that correct?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh and Umer. That's great news story with RMIT and Siemens. If the whole panel wants to jump on, we've also got everyone here, and Michael as well from RMIT. We've got specific questions. So audience, throw some questions into the Q&A, but I'm just going to start by one of the key themes that's emerged today, as I said, is aligning with company strategies and also communicating in a clear and compelling manner. So we've heard about sometimes you've got to bundle the numbers together to make a bigger number. You've got to align with company strategies. I'd love to hear from each of the panelists, what's your compelling solution to get your business case over the line? How have you communicated upwards? What's your tip to share with the audience who's all trying to do what you've done? Starting with Gordon, going from my top left.
Thanks, Amy. I mean, I think you mentioned the things already. It's like understanding the initiative within the corporate environment and what are the current corporate objectives, and certainly saving energy comes and goes. I mean, right now you are able to bundle it into the emissions reduction initiatives, that are roadmaps, and so many businesses, certainly the ones that Energetics is working for a lot of them at the moment, are wanting to develop roadmaps to net zero by 2050. And you say that that energy productivity improvements are a vital part of that, because they can deliver the benefits today. Because a lot of the technologies that will underpin that are available today. Whereas when you get into areas like electrifying materials movement in a mine site, for instance, that's a decade away. Or high temperature heating applications in steel mills, that's a decade away, but not doing things to reduce a lot of energy consumption at the moment, like the heat pumps, the work that A2EP has been doing on heat pumps, for instance. Very important, because that can be done today. So I think it's just understanding what can be done today and tying it to corporate initiatives.
Thanks. I won't tap everyone. Would anyone else like to jump in with some cracking tips that they want to share that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, I think what I've learned at Molycop is that you really need to advertise your wins. So I know in the early days with the first few energy savings projects we put forward, people were a bit sceptical and you had to push really hard to get things over the line. But after you've had 3 or 4 wins and you've advertised those through like internal monthly reports and trying to get the word out there, it gets to the point now where you can basically have them believe anything you tell them, just it's getting easier and easier.
Great solution. Thanks, Jeffrey.
I think, Amy, key thing is really taking the client along with you on that journey, or you being part of understanding what really makes their decision-making process work. So it's not much good sort of coming in and saying, here, we've got this great project, you should do it. It's really working alongside the client. So we try and sort of say we work with them instead of for them, to basically ask questions and say, what is it that you need? And also everyone's business is different. We can sort of say, well, every beverage manufacturer is the same, or we've worked with these ones, therefore we should work here, but it's not. And everybody likes to think that their business is unique, and more often than they are. So it's, what's that going to do to my business? If I do that, what will it do over here? So I think you've really got to bring along the client with the conversation right from the very beginning, and not try and sell them something, but try and say, well, how can we work together to try and develop a solution?
And if I can add very quickly to what Robert just said, is to also engage with both the top management as well as the technical level within the business, because you've got to take the engineer along the journey as well as the CFO to show them the benefits. And generally nowadays, with sustainability being to the front of everyone's mind, they are quite focused, but sometimes it's that storytelling that is required to all of those different levels so that they all see this big objective being achieved.
Yeah, I love that storytelling and promoting the wins. I just don't think you can do that enough.
And I'd probably just say one piece, a great tip that I've been talking to a lot of people about is that decarbonisation roadmap. I think it's a journey that we're all on, many companies making these specific commitments and targets, and how can we, I think we really need to be able to articulate, taking on that storytelling element and educate people throughout your own organisations and accessing government and incentives and fundings, having all that information ready to go is very, very key. Thank you.
Thanks. So my final question to the panel, we've heard about some great successes, we've heard about the tips and solutions, and that's wonderful and positive, but we've also all made mistakes. And if we had not a crystal ball, I guess if a time machine, my question to you is, what are some of those cracking mistakes that you've learned from and you do differently? jump in, anyone. We've only got a few minutes. So, Michael, we haven't heard from you, so I'd love you to say something.
I've got some doozies on this one. I guess you need to be ambitious, but you also need to be conscious of what can be delivered. I think whilst we got some really good outcomes at the end of the day, we did take some bites with Siemens that were very ambitious. We got through it in the end, but it caused, I guess, quite a lot of constraint in terms of the delivery of the project. But that said, it is about making those, I sort of reflect to the roadmap. Once you've got that roadmap in place, you can take those little steps down the path, and those no-brainer business cases, I love that term, that they all start to fall down. So don't be overly ambitious, and don't. Is probably the only thing I would suggest, but in a good way. We've got a lot of technologies that are up and coming, and they all have a place. But is their place where you're trying to put them? I've seen a lot of let's say inappropriate use of technology lately.
I've got a suggestion. It's a very simple one. Mistakes is talking like an engineer to accountants and talking like an accountant to engineers. You need to get them. You need to know who you're selling to, and framing the pitch, for want of a better term, at the appropriate level using the appropriate terms.
Yeah, good point, Gordon, and that's why our presentation tended to focus on that financial outcome, because certainly in an industrial environment, goodwill only goes so far. It's the dollars at the end of the day that is going to really get a project over the line.
I think too, on top of that, Andrew, the discussions that happen in the organisation around which investments should be pursued. If you're an internal advocate for this stuff, if you're acting as an internal consultant, you won't be in all those conversations. But it makes sense to paint to your operations managers why advocating for any energy innovation makes their job a bit easier. Because when they're having a discussion around what their priorities are, you want that to be part of that chat, even if you're not in the room. So I think it probably would be a trap to fall into, not make sure you bring those along for the ride as well.
Any final wise words of wisdoms? And before I hand over, I'm going to ask Siemens to, there's a couple of great questions in the chat room as well, so I'll get you to take those in writing.
So I gather we'll have Amy will have Siemens type in a few questions while we're just closing up, then, shall we?
Thanks, Jared. Well, thank you, everyone. I thought that was a fantastic session. There certainly were a lot of information shared. Some of my key notes and summaries from today is, of course, how important energy productivity is to achieving net zero emissions, and the demand that's coming from investors means we need to show a business case with a financial return per unit of energy. We need to know who we're selling it to, who the appropriate audience is, make sure those dollars are no-brainers and aggregate them where you can, and promote the wins and align with corporate strategies, and of course show the co-benefits. So thank you very much to the extensive panel we have today. I appreciate your sharing both the solutions and the failures. That's always important. But most of all, I really want to thank Jared and Laura and the team at A2EP for having us. These events are really important when we're all in our Ugg boots or thongs, as some of us have said, playing our guitars and doing glass training, and just it's a difficult time, and for all of us in different ways, and the human connection and learning from each other is so important, because just doing documents and business cases isn't enough. And learning where mistakes have been made have been great. So I know it's not easy doing a digital event, it's quite tiring. So well done for keeping the conversation going, and I look forward to seeing everyone face to face in the near future when we're all vaccinated. So thank you, Jared, over to you.
Thanks very much, Amy, and thank you to you for running such a fantastic session. Yeah, I think it's totally agree with your sentiments. This is nice to have this somewhat quasi face-to-face session, the best we can do in these conditions. And yeah, let's look forward to 2022 when we do this face-to-face indeed. And a thank you to the speakers as well. It's certainly when you know you've got this many innovative thought leaders together, it's going to be some great discussion and great points and plenty of notes made by all, I'm sure. So just to wrap up then, I would like to thank our partners in this conference, Race for 2030. As you may have seen if you joined our sessions, it was very much about technologies here and now, what you can do now. And how you can take those roadmaps and make them become reality. But there are many steps in those roadmaps which need to be developed further. And that was very much what the Race for 2030 sessions were about. And so those have been recorded and certainly encourage you to take a look at those recordings when they're out next week. A big thank you to our members and our partners. We cannot put this event on without their support, so many thanks to those. We do have lots of more upcoming events. We've actually got a couple of months of getting into process heating. We'll keep pushing on the heat pumps where we know there's great energy productivity benefits, but also talk wider about the implementation of those with thermal batteries and facility integration and load flexing, and also other process heating alternatives. So we've got lots for you. Go to our website and look out for those announcements on LinkedIn for you to register. So that's what we've got coming up. But yeah, a final thank you to all our speakers and everyone who helped with the chairing and organising it, and to our very own comms lady in the background there, Laura Taylor. You've done a great job making us all look very good here, so thank you very much for that. But I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon and look forward to seeing you at our next event.